Oh man, I finally got my hands on the Game Boy. Everyone's always told me how good this thing was. Can't wait to finally try it. What? I can't even see the screen.
They said it wasn't humanly possible, but now you can have all the power and excitement of Nintendo right in the palm of your hand. Introducing Game Boy. It's portable, it's in stereo, and its games are interchangeable. Plus, Game Boy comes with the outrageous new game, Tetris. And for head-to-head competition, use the revolutionary video link and blow your opponent away. Game Boy, only from Nintendo. Now you're playing with power, portable power.
Yeah, okay. Today we're going to be talking about the Game Boy. Was it good, or were you blinded by nostalgia?
Oh, brother, this guy stinks!
The Game Boy is one of the most recognizable handhelds of all time. Everybody has a story with their mom or their grandma coming in, telling them shut off that Game Boy even though they're like using a toaster. Game Boy came out in 1989. It was created by Gunpei Yokoi. It was inspired by the Game & Watch systems, which were little LCD screen handhelds that would have one endurance-based game and also function as a clock. The idea came from merging the home console cartridge systems with the portability of the Game & Watch. This thing is massive. It could just be a weapon. You could hurt somebody with this.
That's better than a brick because you can't throw a brick, it's too heavy. But a Game Boy, you can really put some power into that, right?
Nintendo knew they couldn't just sell brick that did nothing. They knew they had to give you something. Their first choice was Super Mario Land. It would really appeal to kids. But what if there was an option that could appeal to everybody?
Now everyone's getting in on the action of Game Boy. You get portable excitement, stereo action, play dozens of games like the mind-boggling Tetris, tennis, and golf. And Video Link lets you challenge a friend. It's like child's play for grown-ups. Game Boy from Nintendo. Now you're playing with power, portable power.
Tetris was the best possible choice Nintendo could have made. Choosing Tetris made the Game Boy a must-have for kids, adults, teenagers, grandparents. Everybody wanted Tetris. Everybody loved Tetris. Tetris would literally become the highest downloaded video game of all time. In its day, the Game Boy put literally all of its competition on a t-shirt. On paper, the Game Boy is just so much worse than the other consoles. It has this diarrhea green screen, no backlight, while the other consoles did have those things. Competitors were the Sega Game Gear and the Atari Lynx. They both had full-color backlit screens. The issues with these consoles were horrendous battery life and lack of importance. The games were all just side stories, and they just didn't have the same impact as Game Boy games, despite them being bigger and more closer to a home console experience. Do you want to know what really determined what handheld a kid was going to get? It was the price. The Game Boy was about $90, while the Game Gear was about $150, and the Lynx was at $180. The Game Boy also just had such a deep library, like nobody is touching the Game Boy's library at that time. As a result of all these, the Game Boy literally rolled over the competition. Sold at least 4 times as many units as the Lynx and Game Gear combined, and that is like maximum lowball. That is assuming not a single Game Boy sold since the year when the Game Boy Color released. The Game Boy would end up coming out with some revisions. There was the Game Boy Pocket, which was smaller, and it had a gray screen, and the screen itself was better quality. In Japan only, there was a light model of the Game Boy Pocket called the Game Boy Light, and it just had a backlit screen. No color or anything though. Despite the overwhelming success, no console can survive the march of time. It's February 1996 at this point. It's been 7 years after the Game Boy is released. As most consoles do at this point in their life cycle, the Game Boy began to die. Pokemon was literally crack for 90s kids. It is the highest selling Game Boy game despite coming out about 7 years into the life cycle in Japan and about 10 years in America. Pokemon would literally end up growing into the highest grossing media franchise of all time thanks to virgins like me. Now looking at the actual console itself, it is a chunk fest, but honestly, I typically prefer the horizontal layout like the Game Boy Advance, but with the Game Boy, it's so chunky that it doesn't feel like too cramped up when you're trying to play. The D-pad and the buttons both feel good to me as well. You know, they're a little bit mushy and a little bit clicky at the same time, so it feels really good. And you also have to consider that they're probably pretty worn out from being about 35 years old. The screen's obviously pretty bad. I mean, I have no idea why they went with green over like gray or anything else, but honestly, with the contrast dial, it's not the worst. Like, as you can see, this is all the way up and this would be all the way down. You just got to find the happy medium. The main issue though, honestly, is just no light in here. So unless you are either in sunlight when you're outside or you turn on the lights in your room, you can't really play this thing. This led to so many just like garbage, just little lights that you plug in wherever it is on this in here, and then, you know, like a little warm light, and that's how kids would play in the dark. The game console is nothing without its library, so some recommendations I have for the Game Boy, if you either want to collect or just emulate and try and play, would be Super Mario Land 1 and 2. They're both really fun games. They're a little bit different. This is basically, Super Mario Land 1 is more basic. I don't have 2, but I've played it before. It's really fun. And I definitely recommend you try these out. They're a little bit more unique compared to what you get nowadays, or even with the first 3 games. You know, they're just really fun and unique. Next, Wario Land. The power-ups in this game are so amazing. I love this game so much. Honestly, I think it's one of my favorite platformers of all time. You can never go wrong with any of these Pokemon games. Red and Blue are honestly the same, but Yellow is a little bit different. They're so much fun. They're so broken. They're so messy. They're so slow. But they just have such like a unique charm to them. I love them so much. And The Legend of Zelda, I feel like this game really helped prove that, you know, the Game Boy isn't just something that you do in the car, or just something that it's not second-rate gaming. You know, it can be a full experience. You know, it can be a full adventure. And I feel like this game really helped prove handhelds, and we wouldn't be where we are today without it. You know, Tetris, Dr. Mario, the Game Boy had a lot of good puzzle games. So if you're into puzzle games, I definitely think you should give it a shot. Pokemon Trading Card Game it's like an RPG take on the card game, and it's really fun. If you're into the card game and all, I definitely think you should pick this up. It'll kind of show you what it was like back in the day. I guess like base set, jungle, whatever it was back then. Kirby's Dream Land is obviously a great option if you're into Kirby or you're into platforming, but you don't want Mario or Wario. Kirby's a great game. It's short, it's fun, and you know, it's just to take your mind off things, just have fun type of game. Boxing is honestly a really fun game. It's kind of basically just a mix of Tellero Boxer and Punch-Out, and I think it's a fun, short experience if you're, you know, into those types of games. Donkey Kong 94 was a hidden gem, I think, up until recently. You know, everyone's talking about it now, but it's a really great game. You know, it starts off with the original Donkey Kong, and then it transitions into more of a puzzle platformer, and it's just really fun. Some other games that are just surprising to see came out on Game Boy are the Mortal Kombat series, Grand Theft Auto, and the Mega Man series. Game Boy's had a lasting impact on the industry. Companies have realized that a underpowered console can honestly compete with the more powerful consoles as long as price, quality, and library are all up there. The Game Boy really proved that handheld gaming is more than just endurance-based games or just put some side games on there, you know, whatever. It proved that the handheld experience could be just as good as the home console experience, at least in terms of story and game quality. You know, obviously you're always going to have some sacrifices, you know, small screen, no color, but it really did prove that, you know, they can make just as good of games for it. Game Boy was amazing. There's a reason that, you know, everyone has a story of anything with a screen being called a Game Boy by parents or grandparents. But I don't even know if you could say it really held up for its time, you know. The other consoles were technologically superior, but the experiences that you could have on a Game Boy were amazing. You know, the games absolutely hold up. Console, I don't know as much. You know, I don't mind it, but I'd obviously prefer it being lit. Speaking of which, you can get an IPS mod and really make this thing, like, absolutely hold up. You know, just probably 30-40 bucks and a little bit of work, and it absolutely kicks ass even to this day.